Yeah, I wonder whether the increased radicalization will have some sort of a bump when those young people become slightly older, if their economic situation doesn't improve by as much as they'd hoped, as much as their previous generations has hoped. I wonder whether that will hold on to some of that sort of progressive radicalization, or
It
tamp
would be the
down
first time in history if it happens.
tamp down the inevitable trajectory that goes from higher openness to lower openness, higher sort of liberal worldview to more conservative worldview. Um, but yeah, I mean, the prospect that the future is going to be owned by the people who have children and the only people who are having children. Really fascinating stats, I'm sure that you saw, looking at where the birth rate decline has come from if you organize it by political cohort inside of the US. And from 1990, it's almost exclusively been taken out of people that are left-leaning. So that... No?
There's a couple problems with that data point. I saw the same study. Number one, the way they defined left leaning. Okay, the classic Democratic Party in the United States. There are three clusters to it. You've got racial minorities, you've got organized labor, and you have the educated coastal elites. The way that study defined it, it was just that third group. And
Interesting.
The first two groups tell us something different. Number one, the middle group, the organized labor, they're socially conservative, always have been, and now they're voting that way. And they really like, really like Trump might be a bit of a stretch, but Trump is not a pro-business guy. He's probably the most anti-business president the U.S. has had in my lifetime. And the unions love it. Then you've got the racial minorities, and blacks and Hispanics and Asians agree on nothing. Asians tend to be much better educated, much more wealthy, not necessarily politically conservative or liberal, more likely to be independent. African Americans tend to have been lockstep into the Democratic Party for quite some time, but they voted for Trump in the biggest percentages we've ever seen in modern history. And the Hispanics split right down the middle this last election. They are economically for a degree of redistribution, not anything like the coastal elites. They tend to be the most up and coming part of the United States. So they're most likely to shift economically conservative, which doesn't put them in the Republican Party either anymore, because that's not what the Republican Party is today. But at the same time, they're the most anti-immigration group we have. They want family reunification for their family and no one else. So the Democratic Party has shattered as an institution. And when people start talking about conservative or liberal, you really have to ask what it is how they define those terms, because the way America defines those terms has changed radically in just the last 5 years.
It is crazy. The top line of data that we're seeing at the moment, I'm seeing more and more graphs from stuff like Our World in Data and like We Got the Stats, etc., being posted on social media. There's a great guy from the FT that's doing a load of stuff in terms of data visualization. His stuff's getting shared around a lot. But there always are nuances. And when you dig into those, you find out that the story might not be the story.
Politics has always been messy, and now we're in a time of change, so it's really messy.
Speaking of Trump elevates Saudi Arabia to major non-NATO ally status. That sounds like the most litigious slap on the wrists that I can think of. But is that a big deal? Like, what U.S. Middle East tensions, are they important? How much are we concerned?
I'm not going to say they're unimportant, because that would just be rude. But the idea that Saudi Arabia is an ally is a real stretch. And I'm not just saying that because Mohammed bin Salman ordered the dismemberment and cooking of a journalist and then used the same barbecue pit for a diplomatic party for 300 people later that day.
They cooked Jamal Khashoggi as well?
They didn't eat him.
Yeah. But cooked him.
Yeah, they dismembered him. They put him in a giant barbecue pit. They burned all the evidence. And then later that day, they held a diplomatic barbecue event using that barbecue pit to make sure they could destroy all the forensic evidence.
So there was little particles of Jamal Khashoggi probably inside of a little bit of the barbecue.
Yeah. Let's just put that to the side for the moment.
Seasoned with journalist. What a fucking horrendous story.
The rulers of Saudi Arabia are literally the House of Saud. It's a family. And MBS is a member of that family, and King Abdullah of old was part of that family. And it is this family that created the global jihadist movement that the world has had so much heartburn with. It is this family who their support created things like Al-Qaeda and ISIS, and is indirectly, at worst, responsible for things like the 9/11 attacks. So the idea that Saudi Arabia is an ally in any way requires an immense stretch, unless you go back to the Cold War when we needed Saudi crude to fuel the tanks of Germany and Italy and Britain and Japan and Korea and China in order to fuel the alliance. So if you want to rebuild that world, Arab oil to fuel an alliance to fight whoever, there's a conversation to be had there on strategy. But anything else, this is not a country that has been our friend for a very long time.
Wow. What do you make of the future of energy? EV demand slowing a little bit, shale production and stuff's going on, nuclear renaissance. What's the future of energy look like in your opinion?
Any country where EVs are not subsidized, there are no EVs. So that hopefully would tell you everything you need to know about that supply chain. That doesn't mean that all green tech is stupid, just that one piece. As for green tech writ large, if you're in a sunny place, put up solar. If you're in a windy place, put up wind. I would like to think that that's not a particularly complicated conversation. If you're not in a sunny place, maybe you shouldn't put up solar. Why people have trouble with that statement bothers me. I mean, I live at 7,500 feet above Denver. I get 330 days of sunshine a day. Of course, I have solar panels on my roof. But if I lived outside of Toronto, I would get 1/5 the solar radiation per year. Why would I be so stupid as to put solar panels on my roof in Toronto? It's like this idea that the technology works everywhere is really a problem. And that goes for the others too. Natural gas, oil, nuclear, all of them. Because if you have to have the infrastructure that goes with it, and if that infrastructure is there, why would you burn that power source? Nukes are getting interesting. The United States seems to, in bits and pieces, being moving on from 1973. Finally, it's only been 52 years. The hope is that the small modulars will work. But right now, we still have yet to build a prototype. And so until there is a prototype, I can't tell you what the supply chain might look like. But the sexy nature of it is if you can fit a nuclear reactor into a 20-foot container unit and just plug it into a decommissioned coal plant's transformer network and basically produce as much power as the old coal plant did for 5% of the cost of building a new power plant, well, that sounds great if the technology works. Let's build it once, and then we'll talk about it.
How far away from that technology are we?
We were supposed to get the prototype last November, and then the company doing it went belly up. We've had three more companies say that they're working on it. I have not seen what I consider to be a reliable time frame for when their prototype will come online. The national labs are involved. People are working on it, but I'm sorry.
Without that, is nuclear dominance not as inevitable?
Yeah, nuclear, if you're going to build a large plant, let's just put the regulatory and the NIMBY concerns to the side for a moment. From the day that you put a shovel in the ground and you have every dollar that you need to get it set up, you're talking about 4 to 8 years, probably closer to 8. And that assumes that the power grid can take the power. One of the problems we have in the United States is because the period from roughly 1985 until roughly 2020 was a period where we were moving towards higher and higher end industry that used more precision labor and more equipment, but less smelting and electrical work. It meant that the amount of stuff that we were producing was actually going up in value, but the amount of power that we needed to do it was going down in value. And as we moved from manufacturing and agriculture to a services economy, same thing. Power demand stagnated or dropped until very, very recently, largely because of AI, but also because of the reindustrialization effort we're now going through because of the Chinese problems and deglobalization. So for 35 years, we really didn't build out the grid because we didn't need to. Now we need to. And the biggest thing that is missing is high voltage, long range transmission lines, something that's like 70 kilovolts or higher. The only part of the country right now that has spare transmission capacity is this little triangle from Pittsburgh to St. Louis to Chicago, Appalachia, coal country. Because in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, we had a number of administrations who realized here's where the coal is. It's cheaper to move electricity than coal. So let's burn the coal locally and send the power out to the population centers. Basic math. So the federal government stepped in and helped push through all of this development work. And so now this zone has like quadruple the long range transmission that they're using, in some places less than a fifth. It's the only place that could really build out what we need quickly. Everywhere else in the country needs to build those lines before they think about things like nuclear power. Because if you build nuclear power, you might be able to supply your city right there, but you're not going to be able to ship it anywhere else. That's in part a regulatory issue, but it's mostly just hardware.
How effective is nuclear when it comes to the excess capacity from the grid? I have a friend who helps to build crypto mining facilities in West Texas. And one of the things that they do, which is supposedly of a massive benefit to the grid, is they are able to turn on and turn off their requirement for buying energy. So there is additional energy that's available on the grid, and he pushes a button, or the people that he builds the plants for push a button, and they go, we'll take your cheap energy. Fantastic. We'll go and mine some more Ethereum. How much tolerance, how much foot on, foot off gas do you have with nuclear plants? Do you know?
From a technical point of view, you can go up and down whatever you want. But going up looks a lot to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission like a meltdown. So functionally, no, not at all. So nuclear is only for baseload in the United States. And I think that's broadly a good way to look at it. So for data centers, nuclear is a good match because data centers churn 24 hours a day. Nuclear goes 24 hours a day. Solar and wind for data centers are some of the stupidest things I've ever seen people put on paper. Because to make that work, you need to build 5 times the solar and wind that you would need to power the center, and then build a massive, at least 24-hour duration battery system. By the way, no one in the country has more than 10 minutes. And just the cost is just extreme. And even then it wouldn't be stable or reliable. So nukes would work for that.
You mentioned EVs when they're not subsidized. No bueno. What are the underlying is that consumer demand? Is that cost? Is that prohibitive ability to produce? Like what are the underlying dynamics?
It's electricity. It's really simple. Electricity is easy to generate. It's kind of squirrely to transmit, and it's almost impossible to store in an economically viable manner. You need a supply chain that is among the most sophisticated that humanity has ever produced, that produces and processes a dozen major elements, and in order to do the transition the United States under the Biden administration said that it wanted to get to a majority EV situation in less than 25 years. We would need every scrap of lithium and copper and molybdenum and tantalum and graphite and all the rest from the entire planet, and no one else could have any at all, just to do EVs just here. So no, it was always fucking moronic. That and the cost that's attached to it is onerous. So of course, if you have to pay for it all yourself, sales are basically dropping to zero. Tesla, Musk talked a good game. Not viable economically, not viable geopolitically, and we don't have the processing materials here in the United States to do it anyway.
So that suggests, assuming that Elon isn't ignorant of this, I have to assume that he isn't. He tends to do his research.
He's a marketer. You should think of everything that he says in that light.
But the knowledge that this is the future of the EV market, that in order to be able to make this work within the US, you need this absurd volume of rare earth minerals processed in the right way, capacity, all the rest of the thing. Not only do the stars need to align, but you also need to align a bunch of weird rocks in one of those rock towers on the ground. that is betting the entire future of the company on the direction of the country. And is he basically, in your opinion, is he making an assumption that the subsidies will continue to roll in? Because that makes Tesla very...
it's a non-viable company by any normal math.
But if you get continuing support because there is a push toward green, because EVs are seen as the best way to help climate change, so on and so forth, it is riding that the EV revolution is riding off the back of subsidies coming from any government. Is that the way to look at it?
For Tesla at this moment, as we understand physical chemistry, yes. There's nothing viable at Tesla. There's very little that's viable at EV writ large anyway, even before you consider the cost of the supporting infrastructure build-out, which is a couple of $1 trillion on top of everything else. Just the vehicles don't do what they have been advertised to do. They're also net dirtier than gasoline because of the production cycle on the front end. Now, if you change the electrical system in a way that I don't understand today, I reserve the right to change my mind. If you move away from lithium as the core component of battery storage into something that is less environmentally damaging in its production and more energy dense and can take the vibrations better, I reserve the right to change my mind. But in the last 5 years, I haven't even seen a prototype system suggested for any of this. The closest I would say would be the slow motion move from lithium cobalt batteries to lithium iron batteries. That might help with energy storage at the grid level. It might really make a difference. But for transport, no. It's less dense than what we had.
Where does the net dirty come from? What is the dirty?
Well, people always forget that the electricity comes from somewhere. And if, let's say, I've got an 11 kilowatt system on my house. If I had a Tesla and the sun shone for 24 hours a day at my high altitude noon peak, it took me 2.5 days to charge the car. So you're not using solar and wind to charge your car. You're using fossil fuels. And so the only potential gain that you're getting is that an EV engine is more energy efficient than a gas engine on a mile per mile basis. But the carbon cost of generating the vehicle and especially the battery in the front end is just so much more. And if you're living in a place that's predominantly coal and you're driving an American style sedan, you're over the long term generating a lot more carbon than anything before. Now, those are some very broad statements, and there are 1,000 exceptions to them based on local situations. So, for example, the Chinese vehicles from a weight basis are less than half that of the American vehicles. They would never pass our safety tests, but they're smaller and they kill a lot of people. But because they're so much lighter, a lot of what I just said does not apply to the Chinese situation. So a Chinese EV can break even on a carbon cost basis within 10 years, maybe.
But at the price of a few pedestrians.
Societies make choices when they start crashing policy.
Okay. What are the other sort of damages with regards to production when it? I understand about the lithium. I remember Joe had some guy on his show talking about cobalt mining, and it was fucking disgusting. It was insane.
It's disgusting in every sense of the word. Yeah, environmentally, chemically, and socially.
Yeah. What else? What else is there going into EVs which are a little byproducts we wouldn't realize?
I didn't top off my study for this. Big one's graphite. Graphite's basically a synthetic form of carbon. There is a natural graphite, which is vastly preferred, but the chemical structure is very limited to a few specific mines, so the cost goes up as more of it's used. There's a synthetic version. Basically, you're using it for the regulating the electricity flow in a battery. And if the graphite is not the right kind, you basically get the electricity starting to leak out into the battery itself, which can get a little blammy, but more likely it's just going to be a huge efficiency loss. Copper, obviously. Anything that uses electricity is going to use a huge amount of copper. Lithium, we've already covered. Cobalt's a mess. Manganese, using a lot of alloys for both copper and steel. Sometimes you're going to put this in the electrodes as well. Yeah. There's a lot of moving pieces. And that's one of the reasons why I'm a little hopeful, because a lot of people are playing with a lot of different chemistries to see if they can come up with something better. We just haven't hit it.
Isn't there a rule in the UK that they want to go completely gas-powered vehicle free by 2030, that there's no more, or is that elsewhere?
Lots of countries have announced that either for their cities or for their countries. And unless they're willing to subsidize it to a huge degree, it's not going to happen anywhere. That doesn't necessarily mean that I have a problem with those goals. I mean, lots of time. Well, let me use the California example. California gets a lot of shit. California deserves a lot of the shit that they get. But when it comes to regulation, the state legislature has empowered their regulatory bodies to create these regulations to say, we want to be carbon free, or we want to on the grid by this year. We want to have no non-EVs sold in the state by this year. And as time moves on, if the technology is not manifesting to make that policy, the regulator has the authority, without going back to the state legislature, to move the date or change the mandate. It's a little bit more intelligent than most people give California credit for. And we're going to probably see a lot of places climbing down. We've seen a lot of countries in the last couple of years back away from a lot of what they've done with EVs because it's just not working out.
Which country do you think is closest to being wiped out by energy shortages? Which one is the most precarious?
At scale, the Chinese are the ones in the biggest pickle. They import about 70% of their oil, about similar number for natural gas, and the vast majority of that comes through the Strait of Malacca, probably originating in the Middle East. And so if you ever have a real dust up with either Japan or the United States or India, Vietnam or Australia or Sri Lanka or Pakistan or Oman, that all stops. It's really easy to cut completely. For more traditional places, the Europeans are getting clever. I'm not as worried about the Europeans as I used to be. 3 years ago, there's plenty of reason to be worried. 3 years ago, when the Ukraine war started, the Europeans were in the situation where they thought that if they didn't side with the Russians, that the lights were going to go out. But in the 3 years since, they've built a lot of infrastructure to bring in carbon energy from other places, and it has been broadly successful. And so they've backed away from a political goal that was questionable economically and made a very clear strategic decision that is broadly working out for them, but they didn't sacrifice all of their plans. So they realize, maybe solar and wind does not work in the world's least windy, least sunny continent. But conservation and efficiency are still very good plans. So you've seen some change in mindset and a little bit more realism in the policy, and it's showing benefits.
I'm interested in sort of what the future of the green energy movement looks like, this sort of green transition, and it's how possible it is at the current levels of stability and technology and rollout and instability.
There are no EVs. There are no battery chassis. There is no solar. There is no wind. There is no nuclear without globalization. Too many of the parts, too many of the materials come from a different continent. And so if we're not all doing this together, none of that happens. And so you should move on. If you're in the Western Hemisphere, where there is more mining than consumption, that's probably going to be a little easier. But for the Eastern Hemisphere, hard pass. It's just not going to work. Now, again, if you change the technology on me, I reserve the right to change my mind. But that's where we've been for the last 25 years.
How much of the Eastern Hemisphere being card-carrying, flag-waving, we are going green people? It seems to be mostly a Western thing in any case, no?
For the most part, yeah.
How hopeful are you for a green transition in the West?
If the technology is not ready, and if Westerners are not living in places where the technology can be applied in a way that actually drops your carbon, putting up a solar panel doesn't make you green. Putting up a solar panel that reduces your carbon footprint, that makes you green. And most people who live in the West don't live in a place where that is true.
I think that's one of the reasons why there is a lot of criticism in the UK around the sort of green movement, that we've had a very vociferous government pushing hard toward this as an outcome that they want. and a country that really doesn't seem to be particularly well suited for most of the technologies. Like you mentioned Toronto's sort of 1/5 of the amount of sun that you get. I have to assume that the UK is maybe even worse. We have to go down. We have to go south in order to get to Toronto if you fly from the UK. So we're further up.
Believe it or not, London actually gets a little bit more sun than Toronto, but like just minuscule. Glasgow, though, God, no.
Yes, and I was from 3 hours away from Glasgow, so yeah.
Now, offshore wind in the North Sea is brilliant. Look at Norway. I mean, Norway has been subsidizing. I don't mean to suggest that they're not, but they get over half of their electricity from wind now. Now, because of the dispatchability issue, they're probably pretty close to peaked on that. They probably can't do much more.
What's dispatchability?
The ability just to flip a switch and more electricity surges into the system. You can't do that with green tech at all. You can do it with batteries, but batteries are not good enough to store more than a few minutes of power on a grid level for most places. So the first half for the Danes was easy. The second half, I have no idea how they're going to do that.
How interesting. What's an important mineral? What's the most important mineral that no one's paying attention to?
So, I mean, it's really unsexy, but copper. It's like, you want to expand your grid, you need copper. You want to do more industry, you need copper. You want to do anything with green tech, you need copper, and you need a lot of it. The United States wants to double the size of its industrial plant. The United States, in order to do that, needs to increase its grid by half. That means we need to consume about 12 times as much copper for the next 30 years as we have for the last 30.
Where does that come from? Where is most of the copper in the world?
The only country in the world that has what you would consider maybe surge capacity to increase output on anything less than a 5-year time frame is Chile, the Atacama Desert. Number 2 is the United States. Number 3 is Canada. Number 4 is Mexico. But
so that's good for the US then. That all of it
great.
is. Yep.
That's great, but that's the ore. Then you got to turn it into copper metal. That's China and India. So
fuck! So you can't keep it. You can't keep it domestically and then convert it over here.
Well, I mean, we could. We've chosen not to. But, and, you know, it's not a new technology. This dates back to like the early 1800s. You basically heat it up. You boil off the sulfur. You heat it up some more. You purify it into metal, and then you turn it into other things. There's nothing to stop us from doing that except for the cost, the footprint, the pollution. These are real things. And to this point, America has chosen to just let someone else do it.
Isn't it an interesting Ouroboros thing that in order to be able to increase the capacity of the grid, to be able to move to something like nuclear, which would be a cleaner fuel, you need to do something which on the front end would look like pissing out more pollution into the atmosphere and would cause an awful lot of protests because look at these big, we shouldn't be doing our copper ore at home, look at the big black clouds. It's perspective. Being able to see over big timelines is
one
tough.
of the many, and that assumes it works. And the green technologies that we have right now don't. So spending $30 trillion or whatever the most current number is to achieve net zero in the United States by 2050 assumes these technologies actually do what they say they're going to, and we already know that they don't. We have plenty of math to prove that. This is why I'm really big on physical chemistry, because we need to find new ways to do things, and we don't know what chunks of the land on the planet we're going to need access to make those technologies work until we've built some of them. And
this one is based on gadolinium. This one is based on whatever the fuck.
Yeah. Until we know the answer to that question, we don't know how to prepare.
How fascinating. What do you think the biggest surprise in energy is going to be over the next decade or two? It seems to me, at least based on what you're saying, the technology that is promised is not able to deliver that which it is promising. So will the surprise be disappointment, or will the surprise be an actual surprise?
It's going to be one of each. Let me give you the bad and then the good. First the bad. We're very close, and we have been very close for 3 years, to a significant break in international energy markets, whether it's the Russian stuff going away or something happening in the Persian Gulf or something happening in Malacca or something happening to China. The production of vast volumes of crude is going to fall away. And the consumption of vast volumes of crude is going to fall away for demographic and geopolitical reasons. And I can't tell you which one's going to happen first. I can tell you that whichever one does happen first will then lead to the other one, and shit will get real in a lot of places very, very quickly. And for those of us who still want electricity, we will then basically have to fight to get access to the fossil fuels that will allow us to have it. And that will look different in every part of the world. Second thing, at some point in the next decade, our physical chemistry is going to improve to the point that we have a new idea that we will then want to apply, whether it's in generation, transmission, or storage. I don't know. One of the three, maybe more than one. That will generate a completely new arms race in order to access that technology and apply it. And whoever can figure that out leaves the old problems behind. I mean, the petroleum age was a mess. I understand why people would like to go beyond it. The green age, if it happens with today's technologies, would be worse. But that's not going to stop us from trying to invent something new. And as soon as we do, maybe it's a capacitor, maybe it's a battery, maybe it's power beaming, I don't know. We start with a completely new set of goals, needing a completely different set of materials and different concentrations, and that changes the geography of what we are concerned about. So we might, 10 years from now, be more obsessed with Bolivia than we right now are with Saudi Arabia and Iran. All depends on where the technology goes.
Well, it's interesting. America was obsessed with Bolivia for a little while, but for a different type of substance that they were exporting.
Yeah.
Bring back those
back in the
days.
game. We're good.
Bring back those days.
Don't do cocaine. Sorry, just had to say that.
That's okay. That's a statement that needs to be made. Unless it can power an electric vehicle, in which case, has anyone tried that? Who knows?
I'm sure somebody in New York has.
Yeah. So this increasing reliance globally, because if you're going to increase capacity, it means that you need to coordinate more, and you need to be more reliant. I totally didn't realize the fact that just because you have the raw material doesn't mean that you can process it where it is. It can be sent away and then come back. So global supply chains are more important than ever. Been a few years since we spoke. What's happening with the state of global supply chains? I've heard you say that they don't survive without a global security guarantor, and that era is over.
Yeah. Right now, the ore comes from one place. It's primarily processed in China. It's sent to a third location to be purified to a degree that you can then actually use it, and then it gets turned into an intermediate product. So step one, no matter who you are, no matter where you are, that first processing step that's done in China, that has to be done somewhere else. If we don't get that right, we don't get to try at anything else.
What about the rest of the global supply chain, global food systems, other stuff like that? What else has changed?
I've been pleasantly surprised about global food systems. The sanctions against the Russians have not yet impacted the fertilizer supply system. And fertilizer as a category, there's like 11 different kinds, but fertilizer as a mass category, Russians are still the world's largest exporter. Without that, there is no food production in Brazil at all. And it looks pretty dicey in the Middle East, North Africa, and especially the South Asian zone. We haven't had that problem. In the meantime, the Americans continue to spin up more and more nitrogen fertilizer because that's primarily made from natural gas. And the Canadians continue to spin up more and more potash fertilizer because they've got that in Saskatchewan. So we're seeing other suppliers come into the system. They realize that it's a race. And so far, that's working out. Long term, still a real problem, but we're not facing the acute crunch that we were. Trump's tariffs are pushing manufactured goods for agriculture the other direction. Basically, oversimplifying here, but the more complicated the more complicated the manufacturing supply chain happens to be, the more steps there are, the more players. If you have a high tariff system, it pushes your steps out into somewhere else, because otherwise you're paying the tariff every time something crosses your border.
Yep.
And so it's easier to take the handful of the steps that you do and do them somewhere else and just pay the tariff once when the thing comes in finished. For simple manufactured products that only have a half dozen steps or so, that tends to come to you because that's easier to collate. So when it comes to things like plastics and textiles and furniture, Trump's tariffs have reshored manufacturing. But when it comes to aerospace and computing and electronics and automotive, it's pushing stuff away. And agricultural equipment is definitely in that second category. So we're seeing John Deere, for example, has already cut more jobs in the last 10 months than it did in the previous 20 years.
Wow. I did not know that.
Yeah, it's getting pretty bad in the Midwest right now.
Shipping disruptions, how big of a deal is
We've
that?
been lucky. Yeah. Right now, the Asians realize that this is where their bread is buttered, and they're going out of their way to get along. The Chinese have not interrupted any shipping. In fact, they've even leaned on the Houthis and the Iranians to stop fucking around in the Red Sea, because they realize they're the ones that would be most screwed if that gets broken. So far, good news.
Yeah, well, look, you mentioned Russia there. The last time that we spoke, that was sort of front page news. What is happening with the Russia-Ukraine conflict? Is it entering a new stage at the moment? What's going on?
Every 3 months, we're in a new stage. We're in something called the second revolution in military affairs, which is applying digital technologies to warfare. The first phase was in the 1980s and 90s when the United States started making things like smart bombs and cruise missiles. Now it's going on to much cheaper platforms because low-cost semiconductors are ubiquitous around the world, and anyone can make a drone. And so we've got Ukraine, which inherited part of the old brain trust from the Soviet missile and aerospace things, combined with a country that's desperate to survive, combined with these new inputs that they can bring in from abroad and making thousands of drones a day. So every 3 months, there's a new page. First, it was single-person drones. Then it was jamming. Then it was drones with missiles. Then it was water-based drones. Then it was mass drones. Then it was Shahed drones. Then it was Shahed drones that could do a limited amount of target selection. Now it's something called the Octopus drone, which the Ukrainians are just starting to use, which is a drone interceptor. It's a new day every day, and I have no idea how this is going to play. I can tell you with the technologies that existed pre-war exactly how this war would have gone. Those aren't the technologies that are being used in the war anymore.
Isn't that so interesting that all of the dangerous assumptions people had about modern warfare, all of the predictability, I mean, war is unpredictable enough, but when you apply the growth curve of technology to warfare, you just end up with, I mean, that weird evolution between offense and defense that we saw happen. Well, drones have come out, and this is better than using a Hellfire missile. And then instead of using that, you get a net, and these drones are defeated by a net. And now the drones have a little thing on the front that cuts the net. And now the nets are made of this material. And now there's an EMP that blasts them out of the sky. And now there's the pace of innovation with like kinetic consequences it's mad. It's been absurd.
Right, but this is why it's called the revolution in military affairs. If you go back to roughly 1935, the technologies we were using then, up until 2022, with the exception of the introduction of the jet, really hadn't changed. I mean, it was guns, it was artillery, it was tanks, it was ships, it was subs, it was helicopters. The jet was the only one that was introduced, and that was introduced late in World War II, 1944. We've had more technological evolutions in the last 3 years just in Ukraine than the rest of the world combined has had since 1960.
Wow.
And so the rules, we don't know. We are only in the very, very early stages of developing the weapons, much less the doctrine, much less being able to play that against a battlefield. And we are very fortunate in the West that the Ukrainians want to partner with us, because they are doing in real time the sort of experimentation that is costing lives, that if we were doing this in a broader conflict, would have already claimed 1 million people.
Yeah, I was going to say, I wonder how many countries are watching Ukraine and Russia almost like a lab.
Yeah, the last time something at this scale happened, a major conflict in which people were watching, it was either the Crimean War or the American Civil War, because those were the two conflicts where industrialized technologies first really hit the field, whether it was a Gatling gun or penicillin or the railway.
And people are watching and thinking, well, this is a good explainer, a good sandbox for us to observe what these new technologies are going to be like. How are these?
Say I'm dark.
Well, look, I mean, I'm not saying that Russia and Ukraine is being used as an experiment for the rest of the world to watch, but that's what the people who are not invested in it directly will be thinking, right? Look Absolutely. At this. Look at the way that this goes forward. That seems to me, I was interested in what the most dangerous assumption about modern warfare was, but the assumption that it is predictable or that it follows any of the rules that have been established in the past seems to be a pretty fucking good one.
Yeah. Now, we still need energy. We still need food. When you're talking about drones, you need electricity specifically. So that adds another layer of things to it. But yeah, the rules are changing very quickly.
What conflicts are more important than Ukraine at the moment?
At the moment, that's really the only one that matters, because that has the nuclear question because of the Russians, that deals with the Northern European plain, so automatically draws in all the Europeans. It has the issue of uniting Eurasia under a single power, so the Americans get interested. And then, of course, the Chinese are providing the industrial base that's necessary for the Russians to carry out the war in the first place. So everyone's involved in some way. It is by far the most critical one out there. We'll probably have a few new ones in the next few years. Whenever you break the economic model, politics gets all wonky and security issues naturally bubble up from that. And that's before you consider technological change. So, maybe we figure out whatever the next energy technology is. We have something fresh to fight over in a world where all of a sudden oil is not as reliable. It's one of many ways this could go.
What about South China Sea stuff? That was big deal for a while.
I have never found that sexy. Never. It's just, it's ringed by hostile countries, Vietnam, Philippines, Indonesia, Malaysia. It's not that deep, so subs don't play a big role. The energy in it, the reserves are not all that interesting. And the sand islands that the Chinese have built are, as the name suggests, built of sand. And so the Chinese have already stopped stationing aircraft on them because the runways aren't functional. And if you see this as a naval projection issue, projecting through an area ringed by a half a dozen countries who hate you, you put a few of the new Tomahawks that the United States is developing that are truck mounted, and you can't do anything with that except for loose ships. And even if you could secure it, you have now made it 1/7 of the way to the Persian Gulf. Big fucking deal. The Chinese are boxed in. I've never found the South China Sea interesting.
Wow. I've seen so many video documentaries and stuff talking about these land grabs that expand.
They're breathless.
Yeah. This is, it's this sort of odd geopolitical red tape loophole, which is permitting China to expand the size of its country by saying, this is us, and this is us, and this is us, and it's slowly going to engulf the entire South China Sea.
Yeah. When public relations is your strategic policy, it's not a very good policy. If you want to take it seriously, the Chinese have to conquer Vietnam first. Then we'll talk. Because if they don't control the coast, there's no point in controlling the water.
Surely, based on your theory about China being in a lot of shit over the next decade and a metric ton of shit over the next 50 years, is there not the potential for them to do something desperate, whatever that means, silly, more aggressive, more unpredictable?
I won't rule it out, but there's nothing that they could do that would fix their underlying core problems. They can't change their geography. They'd have to conquer the entire first island chain to have a chance to project beyond, and even then, they're not going to have a 2-ocean navy because there's only one ocean. They're not going to solve their demographic problems with a war. The only country where you could maybe turn enough people into slaves to round out your demographic structure would be India. The Himalayas are in the way, independent of the fact that that would be really hard. So there's nowhere they can go. The resources aren't within easy reach. The demographic situation requires Star Wars-style cloning, and the strategic situation can't be solved with a Navy that is anything less than 5 times the power of the American Navy, and they're nowhere close. They have a lot of ships, But whenever you see like a tonnage per tonnage comparison for a ship, keep in mind that their ships suck and are a lot heavier. So a 40,000 ton Chinese carrier and a 40,000 ton American carrier, this one is an order of magnitude more powerful than this one. They're slower. They can't maneuver. They need too much fuel before you consider things about the hardware that they might launch.
Okay. That does not necessarily preclude them from doing something silly or something kinetic or aggressive.
Exactly. Just purely out of desperation, shape the environment on their way out the door. I can't rule it out. But generally, countries don't die that way. There has to be something that they think that they can achieve. The reason that I don't dismiss it completely is that Chairman Xi has basically gotten rid of all of his advisors. His last real one was 7 years ago now. And when you eat nothing but the propaganda all day, it kind of messes with your head. I mean, this is a guy who has written 30,000 pages of ideological treatises in the last 10 years. That doesn't leave a lot of time to govern. And it may be that his mind is just mush now and that, yes, he pulls the trigger. It's not a very satisfying explanation, but that's really the only way I see it happening.
Yeah. Wow. It really does sort of go to show the issues of intense isolation. It's one of the reasons that supposedly Japan has a particularly unique culture, which is what happens if nobody's allowed to leave or enter for half a millennia. And look at this. It formed into this place that's as close to an alien planet as you can whilst staying on Earth. And isn't that interesting? But it also doesn't have the corrective mechanisms for stress testing your ideas. If all of the people around you and all of the country around you basically is sort of a yes country, like a yes men, you can end up with some pretty squirrely ideas that you start believing, I suppose.
That's one of the reasons why I really like countries like the United States or Germany or Australia or Brazil, because the states have as much power as the national authorities. And so you get a lot of policy experimentations on everything from labor policy to tax policy to culture policy throughout the entire system. And we make some bad decisions, no argument. But we also make some good ones, and then we learn from one another.
Which country is quietly becoming a greater power than most people might realize, do you think?
Mexico. If Mexico was located anywhere else in the world with the industrial plant that it is, we would already talk about it as being more powerful than Germany or France. But all that trade relationship was with the United States, so it skews everybody's perspective. Doesn't mean that they don't have very real problems. They do. But as an industrial power, they're already massive.
What is their advantage?
They're right next to the United States. So you've got the technology, you got the infrastructure, you got the consumption base, and they can complement what they do with what we do. It's a great relationship.
So it's literally a trickle-down effect.
More.
Yeah.
That's a little harsh. The Mexicans are very good at what they do too. But if Mexico hadn't been to the next to the United States, it probably wouldn't have the trade or economic heft that it has. But if you could take this somehow and move it somewhere else, yeah, massive.
Wow. Okay. And when it comes to alliances, tenuous ones, what's the one that you're concerned about in terms of fragility? What are the alliances that you think are more fragile than they seem?
Let me give you two. One that's up and coming, and one that I thought we had solved, and now I'm not so sure. So the up and coming is Vietnam. Huge population, very young, excellent educational system. 40% of their college grads are STEM. And they're now at a higher average technical skill set for their workforce than the Chinese are. And they're now trying to catch up with the industrial workforce, with the industrial infrastructure. Long term, they're absolutely going to be a top 5 trading partner for the United States unless we absolutely muck it up. They're fascists, so we have to keep that in mind. Just because they're good at what we need them to be good at doesn't mean that they're wonderful people. Their government's kind of goo-goo. The other one is Japan. Now, Japan is a country that I used to be concerned about because it was another naval power. Most of the resources they need are not local, so they have to go out and get them. And in a world where the United States cares less about globalization, that means that the Japanese by default have to be more aggressive. That doesn't mean a fight is inevitable or much less imminent, but all of a sudden it is a possibility. And the Japanese under Trump 1 came to the United States to cut a deal on the future and basically signed a deal that was mixed economic and security needs, and basically gave in to Trump on everything that he cared about. And so they thought that if they could sign a deal with Donald Trump, that they were in, because he was the most reactionary, erratic American president we've ever had. And they're like, if we can cut a deal with him, we're good. Reasonable. Trump 2 comes along, badmouths the deal that Trump 1 cut. And all of a sudden, the Japanese are in the wind again. The difference between 8 years ago and now is now the Japanese have 2 super carriers that they didn't have 8 years ago. And all of a sudden, they are a naval superpower, and they were already the second most powerful naval power in the world. And so now it matters a great deal if this relationship falls on the rocks. I'm still hopeful. The Japanese would rather have a deal than not have one. But a lot of hard work was done by Trump to get that deal, and it worked, and it stuck, and then he burned it.
Trump versus Trump.
Yeah.
Peter, you're great. I love speaking to you. It's great to get an update, apocalyptic as it may be.
You're welcome.
Let's bring this one into land. Where should people go to keep up to date with everything you've got going on?
Zion.com, ZEIHAN.com. That's where you sign up for the newsletter and the video logs and the Patreon system, and there's a new book in the works. It'll be out in about
Fiction
a year.
one. Congratulations.
Fiction!
Yes.
Yeah. The end of the world. Fiction. Hopefully.
Awesome. Peter, I appreciate you, mate. Congratulations, you made it to the end of an episode. Your brain has not been completely destroyed by the internet just yet. Here's another one that you should watch. Go on.